July 18th, 1992. As Whitney Houston's mother whispered, "Don't do this," in her ear, America's princess walked toward the man everyone said would destroy her career. What happened next proved them all right. But before we dive into this heartbreaking story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more shocking celebrity secrets. The morning sun cast golden light through the windows of Whitney Houston's New Jersey mansion. But inside the bridal suite, storm clouds were gathering. Whitney Elizabeth Houston, 28 years old and the biggest pop star in the world, sat in her silk robe while makeup artists worked around her. She should have been glowing with bridal joy, but her hands trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. "Whitney, baby, we need to talk." Cissy Houston, the gospel legend who had raised her daughter in the church, stood in the doorway with tears in her eyes. Behind her, Whitney's closest friends exchanged worried glances. They all knew what was coming. For months, Whitney's inner circle had been staging what felt like interventions. Her family, her friends, even her record label executives had all expressed the same concern. Bobby Brown was wrong for her. He was a bad boy from Boston with a reputation for trouble, drugs, and drama. Whitney was America's sweetheart, the girl with the golden voice who sang about love and hope. "Mama, please," Whitney said, avoiding her mother's gaze in the mirror. "Not today." But there was something about Bobby that Whitney never told anyone, something that made her heart race in ways her perfect pop princess life never had. Cissy Houston sat down beside her daughter, taking her hands. "Baby, I've been praying about this all night. That boy's going to change you, and not for the better. You mark my words." Whitney's best friend Robin Crawford, who had been pushed to the sidelines since Bobby entered Whitney's life, spoke up from the corner. "We're not trying to hurt you, Whit. We're trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Whitney snapped, her voice rising. "From being happy? From feeling alive for the first time in years?" The room fell silent. Even the makeup artist stopped working. Whitney Houston, the woman who sang about the greatest love of all, was admitting that she had never felt truly alive until she met Bobby Brown. "From losing yourself," Cissy whispered. "That's what I'm afraid of." But what Bobby whispered to Whitney during the ceremony shocked even Clive Davis, who had discovered and nurtured her career from the beginning. 3 years earlier, Whitney had been at the pinnacle of success. Her second album, Whitney, had broken records, making her the first female artist to debut at #1 on the Billboard 200. She had everything a woman could want: fame, fortune, respect, and the love of millions of fans worldwide. But late at night, alone in her mansion, she felt empty. That's when she met Bobby Brown at the Soul Train Music Awards in March 1989. He was performing My Prerogative, moving across the stage with a swagger and confidence that mesmerized her. While other artists in cream-colored suits might have looked soft, Bobby made it look dangerous. He was everything her carefully managed career wasn't: unpredictable, raw, and real. "He makes me feel like a woman, not a product," Whitney had confided to a friend months into their relationship. "With Bobby, I don't have to be perfect." But perfection had been Whitney's brand since childhood. Raised in the church by her mother Cissy, a backup singer for Aretha Franklin, Whitney had learned early that image mattered. Her voice was a gift from God, and she was expected to use it responsibly. When Clive Davis signed her to Arista Records, that pressure only intensified. She became the face of wholesome, crossover success. Bobby Brown represented rebellion against all of that. 5.5 years younger than Whitney, he had grown up in the projects of Roxbury, Massachusetts, and his music reflected that reality. When New Edition's management tried to control his image, he left to go solo, determined to be himself regardless of the consequences. That authenticity called to something deep inside Whitney's carefully constructed facade. The guests began arriving at 2 p.m., and what they witnessed was unlike any wedding in music history. This wasn't just a celebrity wedding, it was a gathering of musical royalty. Stevie Wonder, Dionne Warwick, Patti LaBelle, and Gloria Estefan all made their way up the circular driveway. The media circus outside was intense, with helicopters circling overhead and photographers climbing trees to get shots of the ceremony. Clive Davis, the man who had shaped Whitney's career, arrived looking visibly concerned. He had watched his protégé transform over the past 3 years of her relationship with Bobby, The sweet, compliant girl he had discovered was becoming more defiant, more unpredictable. He had tried to talk her out of this marriage, but Whitney had made it clear that she was making her own decisions now. This is either going to be the best thing that ever happened to her, or it's going to destroy everything we've built, Clive confided to a fellow executive as they took their seats. Then came the moment that made Cissy Houston realize her worst nightmare was coming true. The wedding ceremony was set to take place in the backyard of Whitney's estate, transformed into a fairy tale garden with white flowers and flowing fabric everywhere. 800 guests filled white chairs arranged in perfect rows, creating an atmosphere of elegant grandeur. But behind the scenes, family tensions were reaching a breaking point. As Whitney put on her $40,000 designer gown, a stunning creation with a cathedral train and pearl details, her hands shook so badly that her bridesmaids had to help with the buttons. The weight of everyone's disapproval was crushing her, but she was determined to follow her heart. Maybe they're right, she whispered to herself in the mirror, seeing doubt creep into her eyes for the first time. Robin Crawford knocked on the door. Whit, there's still time. We could just leave. Go somewhere. Think about this. I love him, Whitney said firmly, though her voice wavered. I know what everyone thinks, but I love him. And he loves me. Not Whitney Houston the star. Just me. Outside, Bobby Brown stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, radiating confidence despite the obvious disapproval from many of the guests. He could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations. He knew what they thought of him, that he was a gold digger, a bad influence, a temporary phase in Whitney's otherwise perfect life. But he also knew something they didn't. Whitney needed him as much as he needed her. The processional music began, and a hush fell over the crowd. As the bridal party made their way down the white carpet, the tension was palpable. Cissy Houston took her seat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. But these weren't tears of joy. What happened during the first dance revealed the real reason Whitney chose Bobby Brown over everyone's warnings. When Whitney appeared at the top of the garden steps, every guest stood. She looked breathtaking in her gown, with her hair swept up and a radiant smile that lit up her face. But those closest to her could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty that she was trying desperately to hide. As she walked down the aisle, Whitney's mind raced with memories. She thought about the first time Bobby had made her laugh until her sides ached. She remembered how he had held her when she cried about the pressure of fame. Most importantly, she remembered how he had looked at her that first night they made love, not like she was Whitney Houston the superstar, but like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Bobby's face lit up as she approached, and for a moment all the doubts melted away. This was her choice, her life, her chance at real happiness. The ceremony was officiated by a family friend, but even the vows felt charged with tension. When the minister asked if anyone objected to this union, a few seconds of silence stretched into what felt like an eternity. Cissy Houston's lips moved in what looked like a silent prayer. Do you, Robert Beresford Brown, take Whitney Elizabeth to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Bobby said, his voice strong and clear. And I promise to love you for exactly who you are. When it was Whitney's turn, her voice cracked slightly. I do. I choose you over everything. Those words, I choose you over everything, would prove to be more prophetic than anyone could have imagined. The kiss was passionate, almost desperate, as if Whitney was trying to silence all the doubts with one perfect moment. The crowd erupted in applause, but the faces in the front rows told a different story. This wasn't celebration, it was resignation. The conversation between Whitney and her mother that night would haunt them both for years to come. The reception was held under an enormous white tent decorated with thousands of white flowers and twinkling lights. If the ceremony had been tense, the party was an explosion of music and celebration. Whitney had insisted on live performances, and the guest list read like a who's who of American music. Stevie Wonder sat at the piano and played Ribbon in the Sky, dedicating it to the new couple. Patti LaBelle, Whitney's godmother, sang a gospel song that brought tears to everyone's eyes. For a few hours, it felt like the fairy tale Whitney had always dreamed of. But when Whitney and Bobby took the floor for their first dance to Luther Vandross's Here and Now, something magical happened that explained everything about their relationship. As they moved together, Whitney's mask of perfection finally fell away. She wasn't performing for the cameras or the crowd. She was just a woman in love, vulnerable and real in a way her fans had never seen. "This is why I chose you," she whispered in Bobby's ear as they swayed to the music. "You make me feel human." Bobby held her tighter. "We're going to be so happy, baby, I promise." But even as they danced, warning signs were already appearing. Bobby's friends from Boston seemed out of place among the music industry elite, and some of them had clearly been drinking heavily. Whitney's family watched nervously as Bobby's crew grew louder and more boisterous as the night went on. Clive Davis observed everything from his table, his concern growing by the hour. He had seen Whitney transform during her relationship with Bobby, becoming more rebellious, more unpredictable. Tonight, watching her on the dance floor, he saw a woman who had made a choice that would change everything about her career. "She's choosing love over logic," he murmured to his dinner companion. "I just hope she doesn't lose herself in the process." As the evening progressed, the contrast between Whitney's world and Bobby's became more apparent. The gospel-influenced crowd of music legends mixed uneasily with Bobby's street-smart friends from the projects. It was a collision of two cultures, and Whitney was caught in the middle. As the last guests left at nearly 3 a.m., Whitney made a choice that sealed her fate for the next 14 years. Alone at last, Whitney and Bobby stood in their mansion, surrounded by wedding gifts and flower arrangements. Whitney was still in her wedding dress, but her hair was down and her makeup had worn off. For the first time all day, she looked relaxed. "We did it," she said, leaning against Bobby's chest. "We're actually married." "Did you doubt it?" Bobby asked, stroking her hair. "For a minute there, when my mother was talking to me this morning, I almost called it off." Bobby stiffened. "What changed your mind?" Whitney looked up at him with eyes full of love and determination. "I realized that I'd rather be happy with you than miserable without you, even if everyone thinks I'm making a mistake." In that moment, Whitney Houston made the choice that would define the rest of her life. She chose passionate, complicated, dangerous love over safe, predictable, manageable success. She chose the bad boy who made her feel alive over the approval of everyone who had shaped her career. Standing in her wedding dress in the early morning hours of July 19, 1992, Whitney Houston thought she was choosing love. What she was actually choosing was a path that would lead to addiction, abuse, career decline, and eventually divorce. But on that night, drunk on love and hope, she couldn't see the future that everyone else feared. The fairy tale was over. The real story was about to begin. This wedding wasn't just the union of two people. It was the moment America's princess chose to become human, with all the beautiful and terrible consequences that choice would bring. For better or worse, Whitney Houston had married Bobby Brown, and neither of them would ever be the same. The irony wouldn't be lost on those who witnessed this day. In choosing love over career security, Whitney thought she was finally taking control of her life. But in marrying Bobby Brown against everyone's advice, she was actually giving up more control than she ever realized. The woman who had spent her entire career being managed, marketed, and molded had finally rebelled, only to find herself in a relationship that would prove far more controlling than any record label ever was. The wedding guests who had worried about this union would watch over the next decade as their worst fears came true. Whitney's pristine image would crumble on reality television. Her voice, once considered the greatest of her generation, would be damaged by years of substance abuse. Her career, which had seemed unstoppable in 1992, would become a cautionary tale about the price of choosing passion over prudence. But on July 18, 1992, none of that mattered. On that day, Whitney Houston was a bride in love, choosing her heart over her head, rebellion over conformity, passion over safety. She walked down that aisle believing that love could conquer all, that she and Bobby could prove everyone wrong, that their story would be different. Years later, after the reality shows, the drug scandals, the public humiliation, and finally the divorce, Whitney would reflect on this day with a mixture of regret and defiance. "I loved him," she would tell Oprah in 2009. "People don't understand that. I really, truly loved him." And perhaps that was the most tragic part of all, that genuine love had led to such devastating consequences. The 800 guests who attended this wedding witnessed more than just a celebrity union. They watched the beginning of one of music's most tragic love stories. The woman who sang "I Will Always Love You" with such passion and conviction was making a choice that would test the limits of that love in ways she never imagined. Bobby Brown, for his part, had won the ultimate prize. He had married the most famous woman in the world, proving to everyone who had ever doubted him that he was worthy of greatness. But with that victory came responsibilities and pressures that his 23-year-old mind couldn't fully comprehend. The weight of being Mr. Whitney Houston would prove to be more burden than blessing. The music industry executives who watched the ceremony understood the implications better than anyone. They knew that Whitney's carefully crafted image was now tied to Bobby's reputation. Every mistake he made, every controversy he created, would reflect on her. The pristine princess they had spent years building was now vulnerable to forces they couldn't control. Clive Davis, sitting in that front row, must have felt like a father watching his daughter make a choice he knew would hurt her. He had invested years in Whitney's career, guided her to unprecedented success, and now she was choosing a path that put everything at risk. Love, he understood, could make people blind. As dawn broke over New Jersey on July 19, 1992, Whitney Houston was no longer America's untouchable princess. She was Mrs. Bobby Brown, and the world would never see her the same way again. The Golden Girl had chosen her path, and there would be no turning back. The fairy tale was ending before it had truly begun, but Whitney Houston was finally, for better or worse, choosing her own path. The fairy tale was ending before it had truly begun, but Whitney Houston was finally, for better or worse, choosing her own path. What do you think about Whitney's choice? Was love worth the price she ultimately paid for this fateful decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible untold stories about music's greatest legends of all time ever.